On a bright summer morning in northern Minnesota, former Navy SEAL Dane Holloway watched his German Shepherd break a command for the first time in 6 years. Rook tore through a crowded lakeside market and stopped in front of a silent 10-year-old girl. He pressed his body against her legs, guarding her from a danger no one else could see. Then Dane noticed the braided cord around her wrist. He knew that knot. He had watched his closest friend, Jonah Avery, make it during a mission 8 years earlier. But Jonah had vanished on Lake Superior 6 months ago. His empty boat had been recovered, and the entire town believed he was dead. The little girl opened her sketchbook. On the page was a black and tan dog standing before a blue door beneath the water. Then she looked directly at Dane and whispered, "My father said that if Rook ever found me, it meant he was still alive. But if Jonah was alive, who had kept him hidden beneath Aurora Bay? And why was the water already beginning to rise?" Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. By the time the morning sun touched the northern shore of Lake Superior, Dane Holloway had already been awake for 4 hours. Sleep rarely held him for long anymore. It came in fragments, 20 minutes here, half an hour there, usually ending with the sensation of cold water closing over his head or a voice speaking through broken radio static. At 40, Dane still carried the unmistakable build of a Navy SEAL who had spent nearly half his life preparing his body for violence. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with broad shoulders, lean muscle, and the economical posture of a man who never wasted movement. His dark brown hair was cut short, though no longer with military precision, and silver had begun to appear near his temples. A narrow scar ran from the underside of his square jaw toward his throat, pale against skin weathered by salt, wind, and years spent beneath foreign suns. His blue-gray eyes were calm enough to make strangers trust him, but anyone who looked longer might notice that calm was not peace. It was control. Dane had rented a small cedar cabin outside Aurora Bay, Minnesota, intending to disappear for the summer. The town sat beneath a wide northern sky where daylight lingered late into the evening, and the air smelled of pine, cold stone, and clean lake water. White sailboats moved across the bay like scraps of paper. Birch trees flashed silver along the roads, and purple lupines grew in loose fields beside weathered fences. It was the kind of place people visited to remember that the world could still be gentle. Dane had come because he no longer believed that, and some stubborn part of him wanted to be proven wrong. His only constant companion was Rook, a 6-year-old German Shepherd with a black saddle across his back, deep rust-colored legs, and a small triangular tear in his left ear. At nearly 90 pounds, Rook was powerful without appearing heavy, built from disciplined muscle and restless awareness. His dark almond-shaped eyes missed almost nothing. He had served in military search operations, trained to locate explosives, follow human scent through broken terrain, and remain still under gunfire. Around children, however, he became patient and almost solemn, lowering his head so they could touch him. Around Dane, he was something more complicated than a working dog. He was witness, guardian, and the last living connection to a part of Dane's life he had spent months trying not to remember. That Saturday morning, Dane brought Rook to Aurora Bay's lakeside market. He normally avoided crowds, but the cabin needed food, and the bright open square seemed harmless enough. Local vendors sold honey, smoked trout, berries, and handmade wooden toys beneath striped awnings. Musicians played folk songs near the marina, and children chased one another through shafts of sunlight. Dane moved slowly between the stalls, keeping Rook on a loose leather leash. The dog walked at his left side with perfect discipline, matching every change in pace without command. Then Rook stopped. Dane took another half step before the leash tightened. He looked down. Rook's ears had turned forward, his body rigid, his nose lifted toward the crowd. "Leave it," Dane said quietly. Rook did not move. The command had never failed before. Dane followed the dog's stare and saw a girl standing beside a flower stand perhaps 30 yards away. She looked about 10, small for her age, with shoulder-length dark blonde hair that had been cut unevenly, as though someone had trimmed it at home. Her skin was fair and scattered with faint freckles across the bridge of her nose. She wore denim overalls over a pale yellow shirt and held a worn sketchbook against her chest. There was a stillness about her that did not belong in such a lively place. Children moved around her. Adults passed close enough to brush her shoulder. Yet she remained motionless, watching the water. Beside her stood a woman in her late 30s. She was tall and slender, with auburn hair pulled into a practical knot and light skin marked by sleeplessness rather than age. Her face had delicate features, but strain had sharpened them. She kept one protective hand near the girl's back while speaking to a vendor. Dane noticed the way she continually checked the crowd, not with military awareness, but with the anxious vigilance of a mother who had already lost too much. Rook took one step forward. Rook, heel. The dog's chest expanded with a slow breath. Then, for the first time in 6 years, he ignored Dane completely. He surged forward. The leash tore through Dane's hand before he could close his grip. Shoppers cried out and moved aside as the German Shepherd ran between tables, knocking over nothing despite his speed. Dane followed at once, every instinct sharpening. He expected Rook to pursue a scent, confront a threat, or stop near an abandoned bag. Instead, the dog went directly to the little girl. Rook pressed his side against her legs and turned outward, placing himself between her and the open square. His head lowered, his ears forward. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He simply guarded her. The girl looked down at him without fear. For one strange second, her empty expression changed. Recognition passed across her face, followed by such overwhelming relief that Dane felt his chest tighten. "Rook," she whispered. Dane stopped several feet away. The woman spun around, startled. "Ren!" She pulled the girl toward her, but Rook shifted with them, refusing to leave the child's side. "I'm sorry," Dane said. His voice was controlled, though his mind was racing. "He's trained. He has never done this." The woman studied him with guarded eyes. Up close, Dane could see exhaustion beneath her composure. "You need to get him away from my daughter." Dane reached for Rook's collar. "Rook, release." The dog glanced at him but remained braced against the girl. Then Dane saw the bracelet around her wrist. It was made from faded green parachute cord, woven in a compact survival knot. A small black metal bead had been threaded into the center. Scratched across its surface were 2 characters, H17. The noise of the market seemed to pull away. 8 years earlier, in a temporary operations room half a world from Minnesota, Jonah Avery had made 2 bracelets exactly like it while waiting for extraction. Jonah had been a combat diver, then a broad-backed, restless man with sun-browned skin, dark blonde hair, and a crooked smile that appeared most often when circumstances were at their worst. He had been the kind of man who spoke to frightened soldiers as if they were old friends and treated every mission like a puzzle that could be solved if no one panicked. The call sign H17 had belonged to their team. Dane had worn his bracelet until the cord snapped during a deployment. Jonah had laughed and promised to make another. He never did. 6 months ago, Jonah had called Dane twice. Dane had seen the missed calls after leaving a classified operation. He had intended to return them, but anger and old resentment had made postponement easy. By the following week, Jonah Avery had vanished on Lake Superior. Dane looked from the bracelet to the woman. Where did she get that? Her expression changed immediately. Fear replaced irritation. "Who are you?" "Dane Holloway." The girl's mother went pale. Wren stared at him as though she had been waiting for that name. A black pickup truck rolled slowly along the road bordering the market. Its windows were tinted too dark to reveal the driver. Rook turned his head toward it, and a low vibration formed in his chest. The truck did not stop. It continued past the marina and disappeared behind a line of birch trees. Dane watched until it was gone. When he looked back, Wren had opened her sketchbook. On the page was a drawing made in heavy strokes of blue and black crayon. It showed a dark body of water, a narrow concrete tunnel, and a bright blue door beneath the surface. In front of the door stood a German shepherd with one damaged ear. Behind it, drawn faintly, was the outline of a man. Dane felt the old operational part of his mind come alive. The detail in the picture was too specific to dismiss, yet impossible for the child to know. Rook's torn ear had happened during a mission years after Jonah left the service. Unless someone had seen the dog recently, no one outside Dane's unit would recognize it. Wren touched the shape behind the door. "That's my dad," she said. Her voice was soft and rough from disuse. The woman beside her covered her mouth. "Wren hasn't spoken to a stranger since Jonah disappeared," she said. Dane crouched so he was closer to the girl's height. "When did your father give you the bracelet?" Wren looked at her mother before answering. "He didn't." The woman drew a slow, trembling breath. "My name is Claire Avery. Jonah was my husband." Her voice was measured, the practiced voice of someone accustomed to containing panic for others. "The police found his boat 6 months ago. His life jacket and phone were still inside. There had been a storm that night. They said he must have fallen overboard." "They found a body?" Claire's jaw tightened. "No." Dane looked at Wren's bracelet again. "Then how did this reach her?" Claire hesitated. 3 nights ago, someone left it on our front step." Rook lowered his nose to the girl's wrist and inhaled deeply. His entire posture changed. His tail stiffened, and he released a faint, distressed whine. Dane had heard only twice before, both times when the dog had located a living soldier buried beneath wreckage. Dane's skin went cold. Rook was not reacting to an old object preserved in a drawer. He was responding to human scent. The dog moved his nose along the cord, then turned toward the road where the black truck had vanished. Dane remembered Jonah's last missed call. He remembered ignoring the guilt that followed, telling himself he would deal with it when his assignment ended. There had always been another mission, another briefing, another excuse not to reopen a friendship damaged by words neither man had meant. Now Jonah's daughter stood before him holding a drawing of his dog. "Did your father ever mention Rook?" Dane asked. Wren nodded. Claire looked at her sharply. "You never told me that." "He said Rook remembers people," Wren answered. "Even when everyone else forgets." The sentence struck Dane harder than any accusation could have. Claire crouched beside her daughter. "Sweetheart, when did he say that?" "Before he went to the dam." Claire's face became still. Jonah wasn't working at the dam the night he disappeared. He was checking water sensors on the lake. Wren shook her head. "He said the lake was only the way in." Dane and Claire exchanged a long look. The bright market continued around them. Someone laughed near the coffee stall. A sailboat bell rang across the marina. Sunlight danced on the water, innocent and blinding. Yet Dane felt as if the entire town had shifted, revealing a darker structure beneath its beautiful surface. He gently took the bracelet between 2 fingers, careful not to disturb it more than necessary. The cord was damp near the knot, not wet from lake water, but from recent handling. There was also a faint smell of machine oil and mineral-rich mud. Rook touched his nose to the bracelet once more and looked directly at Dane. It was not confusion in the dog's eyes. It was certainty. The scent on the bracelet belonged to Jonah Avery, and according to Rook, it was no more than a few days old. Dane followed Claire and Wren away from the market in his dark pickup, keeping enough distance to watch the road behind them. The black truck did not reappear, but that did little to quiet the instinct tightening beneath his ribs. Aurora Bay remained offensively beautiful beneath the late morning sun. Blue water flashed between the trees. Tourists carried paper cups along the marina, and bright flower baskets hung from every lamppost. Nothing about the town looked capable of hiding a missing man. Rook sat upright in the passenger seat, his attention fixed on Claire's station wagon. He had not relaxed since smelling Jonah's bracelet. The Avery home stood on a wooded rise north of town, a modest white house with a cedar porch and broad windows overlooking Lake Superior. Wind chimes moved beneath the eaves, producing soft notes that should have felt peaceful. Instead, Dane noticed the newer deadbolt, a security light mounted over the garage, and faint scratches around the back door frame. Claire saw him studying them. "Jonah installed everything a few weeks before he disappeared," she said. Inside, the house was neat, but carried the unmistakable stillness of a place where someone had vanished without allowing the family to prepare. A pair of men's boots remained beneath a bench. A faded denim jacket hung near the kitchen. Photographs showed Jonah at different ages, laughing beside Claire on a fishing boat, carrying Wren on his shoulders, and standing in an old Navy uniform with one arm around Dane. In those pictures, Jonah Avery had been broad through the chest, with rough blonde hair, a sun-darkened face, and a smile that made seriousness appear temporary. He had possessed an unusual warmth for a man trained to work in darkness. Yet the final photographs showed sharper cheekbones, tired eyes, and a gardenness Dane did not remember. Claire set coffee on the table, but did not drink hers. 3 months before he disappeared, he changed, she said. He stopped sleeping through the night. He would check every window before bed, then check them again. He replaced the locks, copied documents onto drives, and started leaving his phone in the garage during conversations. Dane asked whether Jonah had explained himself. Claire gave a humorless smile. He said Northline Hydro had hired him to inspect aging water sensors. At first, he treated it like routine work. Then he started coming home with red mud on his boots and machine oil on his clothes. There is no red soil near the public monitoring stations. She looked toward Wren, who sat on the floor drawing while Rook lay beside her. He also taught her things he refused to explain: how to break a car window from inside, how to identify safe adults, how to hide quietly without holding her breath. He made it sound like a game, but children know when adults are afraid. Dane felt guilt rise again, not as a sudden blow, but as pressure accumulating behind an old wound. Jonah had called him because he was afraid, and Dane had mistaken silence for pride. "Did he leave anything?" Dane asked. Claire shook her head. The police searched his office. His work computer was empty. The company said he had never filed a formal safety concern. Wren looked up from the floor. "He left the birds." Claire frowned. "What birds?" The girl did not answer. Instead, she placed 2 fingers between her lips and produced 3 short whistles, each separated by the same measured pause. Rook reacted before Dane did. His head snapped up. He rose without sound, crossed the room, and stood directly in front of Wren, his tail lowered and his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made Claire step backward. Wren repeated the 3-note sequence. Rook turned toward the north window and released a quiet whine. Dane's pulse accelerated. Jonah had used that same whistle pattern in the field when radio silence was necessary. It was not a general recall. It meant, follow the marked route. "Where did your father teach you that?" Dane asked. Wren pointed beyond the window toward the birchwoods. "When we checked the birdhouses." Claire stared at her daughter. "You told me you were feeding chickadees." "That's what Dad said to tell people." The words were spoken with such simple obedience that Claire's face folded with pain. Jonah had placed his child inside a secret without allowing her to understand the danger. Dane crouched beside her. "Can you show us where?" Wren nodded, but before they left, Dane called the county sheriff's office and requested the officer assigned to Jonah's disappearance. 30 minutes later, Deputy Maren Pike arrived in a dust-streaked patrol SUV. Maren was 35, medium height, and athletic, with straight black hair cut at her jaw, copper-brown skin, and watchful hazel eyes. A thin white scar crossed one eyebrow, the result of a winter highway accident that had killed her former partner and left Maren with a permanent intolerance for careless conclusions. She spoke directly, without the false warmth some officers used to control grieving families. "I remember you," she told Dane after checking his identification. "Jonah mentioned a SEAL named Holloway when I interviewed Claire. He said you were the man he trusted when everything went wrong." Dane absorbed the sentence without responding. Maren admitted that she had never been satisfied with the drowning theory. Jonah's phone had stopped recording location data almost 4 hours before his boat was found. The weather had been rough but not violent enough to explain why an experienced combat diver would remove neither his boots nor jacket before entering freezing water. More troubling, Maren's request for security footage from Northline's dam had been rejected. The company claimed every camera on the Eastern Service Road had failed during the same 6-hour period. "I pushed for a warrant," she said. "My supervisor told me there was no evidence Jonah had gone near the dam." "And you believed him?" Claire asked. Maren met her gaze. "No, I believed I would be removed from the case if I kept pushing without something a judge could sign." Wren led them through the trees along a narrow trail hidden beneath ferns and young birch. Rook moved ahead on a long lead, pausing at every turn as though confirming a memory. The deeper they went, the less random the path appeared. Small strips of faded blue cloth had been tied high on branches, nearly invisible unless viewed from the correct direction. Jonah had created a route for someone trained to notice patterns. After half a mile, Wren stopped before a wooden nesting box attached to an old pine. It looked ordinary, weathered silver by rain, but Rook rose onto his hind legs and scratched once at the trunk. Dane removed the box and found a second compartment behind it. Inside lay a sealed waterproof tube. Claire covered her mouth as he opened it. The tube contained a brass key, a broken micro-SD card, a folded section of an engineering map, and a note written in Jonah's compact handwriting. 3 bells opened the blue door. Dane studied the map. It showed part of the Northline Dam's drainage system, but several corridors had been crossed out and redrawn by hand. One narrow line led beneath an area labeled Auxiliary Pump Station 3, a structure supposedly abandoned since the 1980s. Maren photographed everything before touching it. "This is enough to reopen the case," she said. "Not enough to accuse Northline, but enough to prove Jonah was investigating their property." Claire held the note as if it were a fragment of her husband's body. "Why hide it in a birdhouse?" "Because he expected his home to be searched," Dane answered. He looked at Rook. "And because he expected someone to know the whistle." That afternoon, while Maren took the map to secure an evidence request, a silver luxury SUV entered Claire's driveway. The man who stepped out introduced himself as Everett Shaw, president of Northline Hydro. Everett was 52, tall and carefully maintained, with thick silver hair swept away from a handsome, narrow face. His skin carried the even color of expensive outdoor vacations rather than labor, and his tailored navy jacket sat perfectly across a body kept fit by private trainers. He smiled often, but the expression never reached his pale blue eyes. Everett had built his public image around generosity. He funded the town library, sponsored youth hockey, and remembered the names of servers at charity dinners. People described him as gracious because he had mastered the art of making power appear considerate. He offered Claire condolences, spoke warmly of Jonah's professionalism, and claimed he wanted to ease the family's burden. Northline, he explained, planned to expand its shoreline environmental buffer and was willing to purchase the Avery property well above market value. Claire's expression hardened. My husband has been missing for 6 months, and now you want his house? Everett lowered his voice into a tone of practiced sympathy. I want to give you and your daughter a chance to begin somewhere without painful memories. Rook moved between Everett and Wren. The dog did not growl, but his nostrils flared when Everett passed near Jonah's denim jacket. Everett paused for half a second, and Dane saw recognition, not of the dog personally, perhaps, but of what it represented. Mr. Holloway, Everett said, reading Dane's name from nowhere visible. Aurora Bay is usually a quiet place. I hope your visit remains restful. Dane held his gaze. It stopped being restful when a dead man's scent appeared on a child's bracelet. For the first time, Everett's smile weakened. He recovered quickly, wished Claire well, and returned to his SUV. Several miles away, Everett made a call from the private road leading to the dam. Boyd Straker answered on the first ring. Boyd was 46, heavily built but lean through the waist, with a shaved head, a trimmed iron-gray beard, and a flattened nose broken more than once. A former private security contractor, he had learned during years in unstable regions that fear worked best when administered quietly. He rarely threatened people directly. He preferred to let them discover that their doors had been opened, their routes followed, or their children observed. Everett kept his eyes on the lake as he spoke. Holloway found the first box. Boyd remained silent for a moment. Then Avery planned further ahead than we thought. Find out what was inside. Do not touch the family unless there is no alternative. Boyd's voice was calm. There is always an alternative. People simply disliked the price. Back at Claire's house, Dane used a field repair kit to reconstruct the broken memory card. Most of the data was corrupted, but shortly before midnight, he recovered 11 seconds of audio. Claire and Wren stood behind him while Rook rested beneath the table, alert despite the hour. The recording began with rushing water and a deep metallic vibration. Jonah's breathing was strained. Then his voice emerged through static. The dam isn't just failing, he whispered. They're making it look like it never failed. A violent scrape followed. Somewhere in the darkness, 3 metal bells rang in slow succession. By sunrise, the 11-second recording had played so many times that Claire could hear Jonah's breathing, even when the room was silent. Dane had isolated every layer of sound he could recover. Rushing water, a low mechanical vibration, Jonah's whisper, and the 3 metallic notes that followed. The bells were not decorative. Each had a slightly different pitch, suggesting they hung in separate chambers or were made from different metals. Dane spread the damaged engineering map across Claire's kitchen table while Marin compared it with county records on her laptop. The official plans showed Auxiliary Pump Station 3 as permanently sealed after a pressure accident in 1987. Jonah's markings told a different story. He had drawn a narrow service corridor beyond the station, connecting it to a maintenance chamber beneath the eastern slope of the dam. Someone kept using it, Marin said. Otherwise, Jonah would have had no reason to redraw the route. Claire stood near the window, arms folded tightly across her chest. The morning light revealed how little she had slept. Then we go there. Dane did not answer immediately. The station belonged to Northline Hydro, and entering without authorization could give Everett Shaw exactly what he needed to portray them as unstable trespassers. Yet waiting for a warrant might take days, especially if Marin's superiors were compromised. Rook resolved the argument by moving to the back door. The German shepherd had spent the night beneath Wren's window, waking at every sound. Now his ears were forward, his body tense with the unmistakable purpose of a working dog that had been given a scent and expected to follow it. Dane took Jonah's bracelet from an evidence sleeve, allowed Rook one controlled breath of it, then gave the command. Track. The trail began along the northern edge of the lake, where summer sunlight poured between birch trunks and turned the dew into silver. Rook moved steadily, nose low, following a scent too faint for any human to perceive. Dane kept him on a 30-foot lead, while Marin followed several yards behind. Claire remained with Wren at the house under the protection of a deputy Marin trusted. The route left the public trail after half a mile and climbed into denser forest. Ferns brushed Dane's boots, and black flies gathered in the warm, still air. Rook ignored every animal track and human footprint that crossed his path. He was not searching broadly. He was following one man. The ground changed near the dam. Dark soil gave way to rusty red clay streaked with crushed stone, matching the residue Claire had seen on Jonah's clothes. Through the trees, a low concrete building appeared beneath a roof of moss and pine needles. Auxiliary Pump Station 3 looked abandoned from a distance. Its windows were boarded, the access road was buried under weeds, and an old warning sign leaned against a chain-link fence. Yet Dane noticed fresh tire impressions beneath the grass and a thin line of oil on the padlock. Someone wanted the station to look forgotten without allowing it to become unusable. Marin photographed the entrance before cutting the secondary chain. "This will be difficult to explain in a courtroom," she said. "Then document everything," Dane replied. "Especially the reasons we could not wait." Inside, the air smelled of damp concrete, diesel and metal, heated by electricity. Dust covered the floor near the entrance, but farther in, boot prints had disturbed it. Emergency lights glowed weakly along the walls, powered by a system the official report claimed had been disconnected decades earlier. Rook moved past rusted pumps and corroded pipes toward a descending corridor. At the bottom stood a broad steel door painted blue. Most of its surface had faded to gray, but the color remained vivid around the hinges where the metal had recently moved. Rook pressed his nose to the seam and inhaled. His ears lowered. Then he gave a single sharp bark, the alert he had been trained to use only when he located a living human presence. Dane froze. Rook scratched once at the door, then lay down with his muzzle against the threshold. A soft whine escaped him, not frustration but recognition. Dane had heard that sound in Afghanistan when Rook found a wounded medic buried beneath a collapsed wall. The dog had remained beside the rubble for 23 minutes while the team dug with their hands. He had refused water until the medic was free. Now, in the damp darkness beneath northern Minnesota, Rook was behaving as if the man on the other side of the steel was not merely familiar, but family. "Jonah!" Dane shouted. The corridor returned his voice in distorted echoes. No answer came. Marin found a manual control panel mounted beside the frame. Its faceplate had been removed, exposing a mixture of original wiring and newer digital components. "This was rebuilt recently," she said. Dane examined the lock. It could be bypassed, but not quickly. Before he began, Rook lifted his head toward the ceiling. A heavy vibration rolled through the floor. Red warning lights ignited along the corridor. Somewhere deep in the station, machinery awakened with a roar. "Remote activation," Dane said. Water exploded through a pressure outlet behind them. The first wave struck the lower corridor with enough force to knock Marin into the wall. Dane caught her vest and pulled her upright as water rose around their boots. Rook remained near the blue door until Dane shouted his recall command. The dog looked back once, torn between obedience and whatever he sensed beyond the steel. Then he ran. They climbed through the station as water chased them up the steps, carrying rust flakes, broken wood, and black industrial sludge. Dane shoved Marin through the outer doorway seconds before the lower level disappeared beneath a violent surge. From outside, they watched brown water pour through drainage vents that had been dry when they arrived. Someone had seen them enter. Someone had chosen to flood the passage rather than allow them to open that door. Rook stood at the fence, staring toward the buried corridor. Mud covered his legs, and blood marked one paw where metal had cut the pad, but he showed no interest in the injury. His eyes remained fixed on the station. Dane knelt beside him. "You found him, didn't you?" Rook touched his wet nose to Dane's wrist, then looked back at the building. It was not proof a court would accept. To Dane, it was almost harder to doubt than a photograph. Marin radioed for county engineers and reported the station as an active public safety hazard. Before official vehicles arrived, Dane noticed a security camera hidden inside what appeared to be a broken floodlight. It pointed directly at the entrance. Everett's people had known every step they took. By noon, Northline attorneys were already calling Marin's department, accusing her of unlawful entry and damage to private infrastructure. The company claimed the water release had been an automated safety response triggered by trespassers. Marin's supervisor ordered her back to the station house. She ignored the command long enough to drive Dane home, but her anger had become cold and deliberate. "They flooded a sealed corridor while we were inside it," she said. "That gives me probable cause, whether my boss likes it or not." Dane looked toward the lake. "Probable cause only matters if the people signing the warrants aren't owned." Claire was waiting on the porch when they returned. Her relief at seeing them changed to fear when Dane described the blue door. Wren sat beside Rook while Claire cleaned the cut on his paw. The girl's hands were gentle, and the dog watched her with complete trust. "Was my dad there?" she asked. Dane considered lying to protect her, but children living inside uncertainty often recognized false reassurance more quickly than adults. "Rook believes someone was behind that door," he said. Wren nodded, as though he had confirmed something she already knew. That evening, Dane agreed to meet Marin at the sheriff's office, leaving Claire and Wren at the crowded Marina Cafe, where security cameras and tourists made an open attack less likely. Rook went with them. The cafe sat beside the public dock, bright with hanging lights and summer music. Dane had been inside the sheriff's office less than 15 minutes when Claire called. She did not speak. All he heard was wind, a boat engine, and Wren crying out. Dane and Rook reached the marina in under 4 minutes. At the far end of the dock, Boyd Straker had one hand around Wren's upper arm and the other pointing toward a small motorboat. He wore a gray work shirt and dark glasses, his broad frame blocking the girl from view of most people. To a casual observer, he might have looked like a stern relative guiding a reluctant child. Claire was struggling with a second man who had stepped between them. Rook saw Wren. The dog accelerated so hard the leash snapped against Dane's palm. Boyd released the girl and turned, just as Rook reached him. The German Shepherd did not bite. He struck Boyd in the chest with his full weight, drove him backward against a piling, and stood over Wren, teeth exposed. Dane arrived a heartbeat later and pulled the second man away from Claire. Boyd raised both hands, his expression infuriatingly calm. "The child came willingly," he said. "I told her I knew where her father was." Wren clung to Rook's neck. He said Dad was waiting across the lake. Marin placed Boyd in handcuffs, but the situation immediately became complicated. No one nearby had seen how the contact began. Boyd claimed Wren approached him after hearing Jonah's name. Claire had been blocked from reaching them, but had not seen him use a weapon. The second man insisted he was only trying to prevent a misunderstanding from becoming violent. Then, a woman stepped forward from near the bait shop holding a compact video camera. Her name was Tessa Quill. She was 35, short and wiry, with sun-brown skin, curly black hair cut unevenly around her jaw, and sharp green eyes that seemed to catalog every lie before the speaker finished telling it. Tessa had once worked as an investigative reporter for the regional newspaper. She had resigned 2 years earlier after Northline threatened the paper with a lawsuit, and her editor removed a story about unexplained maintenance accidents at the dam. The experience had made her suspicious of institutions, but not cynical enough to stop collecting evidence. "I recorded the last 40 seconds, she said. It shows him pulling the girl toward the boat after she tried to step away. The footage was not enough to prove kidnapping, but it destroyed Boyd's claim that Wren followed freely. Marin arrested him for unlawful restraint and child endangerment. Boyd did not resist. As he passed Dane, he spoke quietly enough that only Dane could hear. "You opened the door Jonah worked very hard to keep closed." That night, Claire finally persuaded Wren to describe what had happened 3 days after Jonah disappeared. She had awakened to 3 whistles outside her bedroom window. By the time she reached the porch, no one was there. The bracelet lay on the top step, still warm. Near the tree line, she had seen a man limping toward a dark truck. She had never seen his face. Dane attached a small camera and audio recorder to Rook's harness before letting him patrol the property. Shortly after 2 in the morning, the dog disappeared into the trees. The camera feed showed him returning to Auxiliary Pump Station 3, entering through a drainage opening exposed by the flood and approaching the submerged blue door from an upper maintenance ledge. Rook lowered his head. From behind the steel came 3 slow knocks. A pause followed. Then 3 more. Dane listened through the receiver, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was the military distress signal Jonah had taught them years earlier. Someone behind the blue door was still alive. Dane watched the recording from Rook's harness until dawn turned the windows of Claire's house pale blue. Each time the 3 knocks sounded from behind the submerged door, his body reacted before his mind could reason with it. His shoulders tightened. His breathing shortened. Somewhere beneath the concrete and black water, a living person had recognized the dog and answered with a signal known only to a small group of men who had once trusted one another with their lives. It was not yet proof that Jonah was behind the door, but they no longer believed they were searching for a body. They were searching for a prisoner. Claire sat across from him at the kitchen table, wrapped in Jonah's old denim jacket despite the warmth of the house. She had stopped asking whether her husband was alive. The question had become too painful. Instead, she asked why anyone would keep him hidden for 6 months. Dane had asked himself the same thing. Boyd Straker had attempted to reach Wren. Northline had flooded the corridor rather than allow the door to be opened. And Everett Shaw had offered Claire enough money to leave town without asking further questions. If Jonah had known only that the dam was unsafe, killing him would have been simpler. Keeping him alive meant he possessed something Northline still needed. Tessa Quill arrived shortly after sunrise, carrying 2 canvas bags filled with copied reports, old newspapers and public records. She looked as though she had not slept either. Her uneven black curls were tied beneath a red bandana, and her sharp green eyes carried the focused excitement of a reporter who had finally found the story that once destroyed her career. Northline did not hire Jonah for routine sensor work, she said. They hired him because the state threatened to suspend the dam's operating license unless an independent engineer certified the Eastern Foundation. She spread maintenance reports across the table. Several showed matching signatures from different inspectors, the handwriting so similar it appeared copied. Others listed pressure readings that remained identical for months, an impossibility in a system affected by rainfall, snowmelt, and seasonal temperature changes. Jonah had been brought in because his military diving experience allowed him to inspect submerged structures most civilian engineers could not reach. According to the official record, he had found no immediate danger. According to his hidden map and recording, he had discovered something far worse. Tessa had obtained satellite images showing temporary pumping equipment positioned near the eastern slope on nights when public access roads were closed. Northline was quietly diverting water through old service tunnels to reduce pressure against a cracked section of foundation. The method worked only as long as the pumps ran continuously. If the machinery stopped during heavy rain, water would force its way through the damaged stone beneath the dam. Marin joined them by secure video call from an empty records room at the sheriff's office. She had been ordered to surrender the evidence recovered from the birdhouse, but instead had copied every file and placed the originals in a bank deposit box outside the county. Her supervisor had also ordered Boyd released before sunrise, reducing the marina incident to a family misunderstanding. Marin's anger no longer sounded emotional. It had hardened into commitment. The eastern neighborhoods sit lower than the emergency spillway, she said. If the foundation fails, the water will not move toward the industrial zone. It will move through Birch Hollow and the school district. More than 2,000 people live there. During the coming Hajkai festival, hundreds more would camp near the shoreline. Claire stared at the maps as if the lines represented individual faces. Jonah knew. Yes, Tessa replied. And Northline knew he knew. Dane studied a set of encrypted file transfer logs recovered from Jonah's old cloud account. 3 days before his disappearance, he had uploaded a large archive, then split the access key into separate verification steps. The files could not be opened without a phrase generated by Jonah's personal encryption system. That is why he's alive, Dane said. They have the archive, but not the key. They have been trying to make him unlock it. Claire's expression collapsed for only a second before she forced herself upright. 6 months of uncertainty had allowed her to imagine drowning, exposure, or a quick death. Captivity was harder because it contained time. Every day Jonah remained alive was another day he might have believed his family had forgotten him. Ran had been sitting beneath the window with Rook's injured paw resting across her knee. She listened without interrupting, her fingers moving slowly through the thick fur along his neck. When Dane mentioned the 3 bells, Rook raised his head. Wren reached for her sketchbook and turned to a drawing they had not seen before. It showed 3 narrow chambers connected by a single line. In each chamber hung a bell of a different size. Dad said old machines listen better than new people, she murmured. He said if the lights ever went out, the bells would remember the way home. Dane felt the room become still. Wren tapped the page 3 times. High-low, middle. Rook lifted one paw and struck the wooden floor in the same rhythm. Claire's breath caught. The dog had not merely heard the bells in Jonah's recording. He remembered the sequence. For an instant, the line between training and something deeper blurred. Dane had spent his life trusting facts that could be measured. But Rook's certainty felt like a form of faith, an animal holding on to a promise long after the people around him had accepted loss. The moment changed their investigation. The bells were not a warning signal. They were a mechanical code. The old dam blueprints confirmed it. Before electronic controls were installed, 3 pressure bells had been mounted at separate junctions inside the maintenance system. Workers struck them in a prescribed order during emergencies to indicate which tunnels were safe. A mechanical relay connected to the bells could release a lock even during a total power failure. Jonah's message, 3 bells open the blue door, was an instruction, not a metaphor. The problem was reaching them. 2 bells sat inside accessible upper tunnels, but the third was located beyond a corridor Northline had filled with concrete on official plans. Dane suspected the concrete wall concealed a removable maintenance panel. Before he could examine it, the first direct attack came against Claire's home. Just after midnight, the power failed. The security lights died, followed by the phone line and wireless router. Dane was already awake. He guided Claire and Wren into the reinforced pantry while Marin drove toward the house. Rook moved through the darkness without barking. Glass shattered near the living room, and a man climbed through the window carrying a pry bar and a can of red paint. He was thin, middle-aged, and dressed in Northline coveralls with the company patch removed. Rook approached low and silent. When the intruder turned, the German shepherd struck his wrist, forcing him to drop the pry bar, then drove him backward into a corner. He did not bite. He stood inches away, lips lifted, controlling the man with nothing but posture and a low, continuous growl. The intruder began to cry. He claimed Boyd had paid him to destroy the house and paint a warning on Wren's bedroom wall. Dane found the unfinished words inside the can's lid. "Stop digging or she disappears." Marin arrived and took the man into custody before county deputies could interfere. She then removed her badge, placed it on Claire's table, and said she would no longer follow orders designed to protect criminals. Dane pushed the badge back toward her. "Keep it," he said. "We may need one person in this county who remembers what it means." By morning, Marin had obtained access to a mobile thermal camera used by the volunteer fire department for underground rescues. A direct approach to the Blue Door remained impossible because North Line had increased security around the pump station. But Tessa located an abandoned observation post on the ridge above the dam. Wren insisted on seeing the photographs before they left. When Dane showed her an enlarged frame from Rook's camera, she pointed to a small white mark near the upper corner of the Blue Door. It was shaped like a 5-pointed star. Claire recognized it from Wren's earliest drawings. Tessa searched the historical plans and found the same symbol beside an emergency escape shaft leading from the lower tunnels to the ridge observation post. The shaft had been omitted from all modern diagrams. Jonah had hidden the route inside stories, he told his daughter, trusting that adults would dismiss the drawings as grief while Wren preserved every detail. Dane, Marin, and Tessa reached the observation post near sunset. The structure was little more than a concrete room buried beneath wild grass, its windows facing the shining lake. Behind a rusted instrument cabinet, they discovered a narrow ventilation shaft descending toward the blue chamber. Dane lowered the thermal camera on a reinforced cable while Tessa monitored the screen. At first, it showed only cold concrete and moving water. Then the image shifted past the edge of the door. A human shape appeared. The figure was lying against the far wall, knees drawn toward the chest. One arm moved weakly as the camera turned. Heat still radiated from the body. Claire, watching through Marin's secure video link, whispered Jonah's name. Dane could not confirm the face, but Rook pressed himself against the shaft opening and began to whine. On the screen, the water surrounding the figure was already above the waist. As they watched, it climbed another inch. The water inside the blue chamber had risen another 4 inches by the time Dane finished studying the thermal images. Waiting for a federal warrant was no longer an option. If North Line increased the flow again, the person behind the door would drown before any official team reached the dam. Dane divided the operation into 3 parts. Tessa would remain at the abandoned observation post, monitoring the thermal camera and recording everything to an encrypted server. Claire and Wren would stay at Marin's family cabin several miles inland, where only one access road approached through the trees. Dane, Marin, and Rook would enter through the emergency shaft, locate the 3 pressure bells, and open the mechanical lock from inside. Marin had been officially suspended that morning for refusing to surrender evidence, but she still wore her badge beneath her jacket. It no longer represented permission. It represented the promise she had made to herself after her partner's death. Never again allow procedure to become an excuse for abandoning someone in danger. Before leaving, Dane knelt in front of Wren. The girl held Rook's broad face between her hands and pressed her forehead to his. "Bring him home," she whispered. Rook's dark eyes remained fixed on her until Dane gave the command to move. The emergency shaft descended through nearly 80 feet of stone. Dane went first, using the rusted ladder only where its bolts appeared secure. Marin followed, carrying a waterproof evidence pack and compact medical supplies. Rook wore a reinforced harness with a short rescue line attached to Dane's belt. The dog lowered himself carefully from platform to platform, his injured paw wrapped beneath a protective boot. At the bottom, they entered a narrow tunnel where cold water moved around their ankles. The walls sweated with condensation, and the air smelled of iron mold and diesel exhaust. Emergency bulbs glowed at irregular intervals, confirming the system still had power. Rook led them past a collapsed storage room and stopped before a thin wire stretched knee-high across the passage. A small explosive charge had been connected to the ceiling supports. Dane disabled it, then found 2 more traps farther ahead. Boyd had not expected maintenance workers. He had expected trained intruders. Near the first pressure chamber, a Northline guard emerged from behind a pipe with a flashlight and handgun. He was a heavy-set man in his early 40s, with a shaved face, nervous eyes, and the stiff movements of someone accustomed to intimidating unarmed workers rather than confronting resistance. Dane closed the distance before the man could raise the weapon, trapped his wrist, and lowered him silently to the floor. Marin secured him with plastic restraints and recorded his face for identification. The second guard, younger and thinner, fled when Rook stepped into the light with his teeth exposed. They could not pursue him without losing time. The first bell hung inside a circular chamber where old gauges trembled beneath increasing pressure. It was small and bronze, producing the highest note when Dane struck it with the attached hammer. The second stood deeper in the system, a heavy iron bell suspended above a drainage gate. Its low vibration passed through the floor and into Dane's bones. They needed the third bell before the mechanism would release. Tessa guided them through radio whispers, comparing their location with Jonah's hand-drawn map. The final route ended at what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. Marin found no seam. The Rook sniffed along the base and began pawing at one section. Dane cleared away mineral deposits and uncovered a recessed handle. The wall was not concrete. It was a steel maintenance panel coated with decades of artificial grime. Behind it lay a dark crawlspace barely wide enough for a man. As Dane prepared to enter, Rook pushed past him. "No," Dane whispered, catching the harness. The dog strained toward the darkness, not in fear but urgency. From somewhere ahead came a faint scrape, followed by a broken voice. "Rook?" The dog went still. Dane had heard Jonah shout through gunfire, laugh after near-death escapes, and argue with officers twice his rank. He had never heard his voice sound so fragile. Rook released a sound deep in his throat, half whine and half breath, then crawled forward before Dane could stop him. When Dane reached the third chamber, he found the German shepherd lying against a steel barrier, pressing his body as close as possible to the man on the other side. Through a narrow opening, a pale hand reached out and touched the tear in Rook's left ear. The fingers trembled, but knew exactly where to go. "You remembered," Jonah whispered. For 6 months, men had questioned him, deprived him of sleep, and told him that his family had accepted his death. Yet the moment Rook placed his muzzle beneath Jonah's hand, something returned to the prisoner's face. Not strength exactly, faith. Dane had spent years believing survival depended on training, planning, and force. Watching Jonah recognize the dog showed him another kind of survival, the refusal to believe one had been forgotten. The third bell stood behind the barrier. Jonah could not reach it because one ankle had been chained to a pipe. Dane passed a compact cutting tool through the opening, but Jonah's hands were too weak to control it. Marin located the release assembly above the wall while Dane held a light through the gap. Together, they forced open a narrow service hatch, allowing Rook to squeeze through first. The dog immediately pressed his head against Jonah's chest. Dane followed and found his friend sitting waist-deep in black water. Jonah was thinner by at least 40 pounds. His once broad face had become hollow, and his dark blonde hair hung to his shoulders in dirty strands. A rough beard covered his jaw, streaked with premature gray. Bruises marked his ribs, and an infected wound ran along his left calf. Despite the damage, his blue eyes remained alert. They moved over Dane's face with disbelief, anger, and relief tangled together. "You took your time," Jonah said. Dane almost laughed, but the sound died in his throat. "I know," Marin treated Jonah's leg while Dane cut the chain. Jonah explained that Everett's men had captured him after he copied evidence showing the Eastern Foundation was failing. Northline had obtained the encrypted archive, but could not open it without Jonah's rotating access phrase. Boyd had kept him alive, moving him between chambers whenever inspections approached. The current flooding was not accidental. Everett planned to open the main discharge gates during Aurora Bay's Hux Festival, claiming the action was necessary to relieve storm pressure. The resulting surge would destroy the old tunnels, erase the hidden equipment, and make the foundation damage appear to have been caused by an unpredictable geological event. "He thinks he can control the collapse," Jonah said. "He can't. The crack has moved. If all the gates open together, the eastern base may shear away. Thousands of people would be gathered along the shoreline when it happened." Dane struck the third bell. Its middle note joined the fading vibration of the other two, and somewhere inside the wall, a series of mechanical gears began to turn. The blue door released with a deep metallic impact. At the same moment, the younger guard who had escaped reached the remote controls. Warning lights flashed, and water poured into the chamber through two overhead outlets. Tessa shouted through the radio that the pressure throughout the lower system was rising. Dane supported Jonah beneath one arm, while Marin carried the evidence pack. On a shelf near the doorway, Jonah pointed to a rugged hard drive. "Everything is on that." Dane reached for it, but a steel brace collapsed between them. The hard drive landed on the far side as water surged through the room. For one terrible second, Dane saw another mission years earlier, a wounded teammate beneath burning wreckage, an objective case only a few yards away, and an order to retrieve the intelligence first. Dane had obeyed then. The teammate had died before he returned. This time, Dane turned away from the drive. He lifted Jonah and moved. The tunnels filled faster than they could climb. Rook ran ahead, locating pockets of stable flooring beneath the opaque water. A broken metal sheet sliced through the protective boot on his injured paw, but the dog continued without slowing. At a narrow bridge above the main drainage channel, the current struck Marin sideways. The railing broke, and she fell into the black water. Rook jumped after her before Dane could issue a command. He caught the back strap of her vest in his jaws and braced his hind legs against a submerged beam. The current dragged both of them toward the open channel. Dane lowered Jonah against the wall, wrapped the rescue line around a pipe, and pulled until Marin reached the edge. Rook's body shook with effort, but he did not release her until Dane had both hands on her vest. They reached the emergency shaft as the lower tunnels vanished beneath the flood. Dane climbed with Jonah secured in a rescue sling while Marin guided Rook from below. The dog's bleeding paw slipped twice, yet each time he found another hold. When they emerged from the observation post, the sun was breaking over Lake Superior. Golden light poured across the water and turned the wet grass around them into fire. Claire was waiting with emergency medical volunteers she trusted. She ran to Jonah but stopped a few feet away, afraid that touching him might cause the moment to disappear. Jonah raised one shaking hand. Claire crossed the distance and held him with a sound that carried 6 months of grief out of her body. Wren knelt beside Rook, crying into his wet fur, while the dog finally allowed himself to collapse. By afternoon, Everett Shaw had gone before local cameras. Standing in a clean suit outside Northline headquarters, he claimed Dane had illegally entered critical infrastructure, damaged the pumping system, and removed a mentally unstable former employee from protective medical custody. Without the hard drive, Northline believed no physical evidence had survived the flood. Public opinion fractured immediately. Some residents saw Dane as a rescuer. Others feared he had endangered the town. Jonah regained consciousness briefly at the hospital. Dane sat beside him while Rook slept beneath the bed with his paw bandaged. "The drive is gone," Dane said. Jonah's cracked lips formed the beginning of a smile. "That was never the last copy. Where is it?" Jonah closed his eyes, struggling to remain awake. Where Wren could still see the midnight sun, Dane understood that northern Minnesota never truly had a midnight sun. But Jonah had used the phrase whenever he described the summer evenings at the old lighthouse north of Aurora Bay. Before sleep took him again, Jonah whispered one final word. Light? By late afternoon, Aurora Bay had dressed itself for celebration. Strings of white lights stretched between buildings along the waterfront. Musicians tuned guitars beneath canvas tents, and hundreds of paper lanterns waited to be released over Lake Superior after sunset. The annual Solstice Festival had always been built around the illusion that summer light could linger forever in the north. At that latitude, the sun still disappeared, but slowly, staining the horizon gold long after evening should have arrived. Jonah had called it the midnight sun when Wren was little, not because it was scientifically true, but because the old lighthouse north of town held the last light longer than any other place they knew. Dane understood the clue as soon as he saw the weathered tower rising from the cliff beyond the festival grounds. The lighthouse had been decommissioned years earlier, yet its glass lantern room still caught the setting sun like a flame. Jonah remained under medical supervision at the county hospital, too weak to leave his bed, but conscious enough to confirm Dane's interpretation through a secure call. Claire stayed beside him while Dane, Marin, Tessa, Wren, and Rook drove north along the shoreline road. Rook lay in the rear of the vehicle with his injured paw wrapped and his body exhausted from the tunnel rescue. Dane had intended to leave him with Claire, but the dog refused to remain behind. The moment Wren entered the truck, Rook forced himself upright and rested his head against her shoulder, as if the girl had become part of his assignment. The lighthouse stood beyond a field of tall grass and purple fireweed. Its white paint had peeled into gray scales, and rust marked the iron railing around the lantern room. Tessa carried cameras, portable drives, and a satellite transmitter in a canvas pack. Her return to investigative work had altered her posture. The anger that once lived behind her green eyes had become purpose, and she moved with the urgent precision of someone who understood that truth survived only if it reached enough people at once. Marin wore civilian clothes because her suspension had become official, but her badge remained in her pocket. Wren led them inside. She knew the narrow staircase from countless visits with Jonah. Near the top, she stopped before an old brass control cabinet and touched a scratch in the shape of a small bird. Dane removed the panel. Behind it, taped beneath the rotating light mechanism, was a waterproof data case containing a solid-state drive and a handwritten note addressed to Claire and Wren. Dane did not open the letter. That belonged to them. Tessa connected the drive to an isolated laptop. The files were protected, but Jonah had built the access phrase from details only his family would know. The date Wren first saw the Northern Lights, Claire's childhood nickname, and the number of steps inside the lighthouse. Wren supplied the final answer. The screen filled with inspection videos, internal emails, altered pressure reports, recordings of Boyd threatening Jonah, and financial transfers linking Everett Shaw to county officials. There was also a simulation showing the Eastern Foundation failing under a full gate release. The projected flood path passed directly through the festival grounds. Tessa began uploading everything to multiple newsrooms and federal databases, then opened a live broadcast. She did not dramatize what she had found. She showed the original data beside the falsified versions, explained the pressure readings, and played a recording of Everett ordering Boyd to erase the tunnels before the state sees what is underneath. Within minutes, viewers climbed from hundreds to thousands. Festival attendees began watching the broadcast on their phones while music still played below. Everett could no longer bury the evidence locally. Yet Dane knew men like him became most dangerous when they lost control of the story. Rook suddenly rose. The movement was so abrupt that Wren stepped back. The German shepherd lifted his nose toward the open lighthouse window, breathing in short, urgent bursts. Then he ignored Dane's command to stay, pushed down the spiral staircase, and limped into the field. "Rook!" Dane followed. The dog did not head toward the road or the festival crowd. He ran toward a gray Northline maintenance truck parked behind a row of portable generators. Rook circled the vehicle once, then sat beside the rear wheel and delivered a sharp explosive detection alert. For a moment, Dane heard nothing except wind moving through the grass. Then he saw a thin wire beneath the chassis. The truck carried industrial charges, remote detonators, and a transmitter connected to the dam's gate controls. Boyd had hidden a mobile command unit in plain sight among legitimate festival equipment. Dane looked toward the waterfront and saw Boyd near the public dock, one hand gripping Wren's arm. The girl had followed Rook outside, but stopped when Boyd stepped from behind the lighthouse service building. He held a pistol low against his thigh, concealed from the people passing nearby. "Call Jonah," Boyd said. His iron-gray beard was wet with sweat, and for the first time, his composure showed cracks. "Tell him to give me the shutdown sequence." Wren stared at him without speaking. Fear tightened her face, but she did not cry. Dane moved slowly into view. "Let her go." Boyd pulled Wren toward a waiting speedboat. "Everett is finished either way. I am not." Rook placed himself between Dane and the truck, torn between the explosives and the child. His ears moved toward Wren. Dane had seen that conflict before in Working Dogs, forced to choose between two alerts. He pointed to the vehicle. "Guard." Rook remained beside the explosives. It was the correct command, and it felt like betrayal. Boyd shoved Wren onto the boat and accelerated away from the dock. Dane seized a rescue craft tied nearby, while Marin called the state police and ordered the festival evacuation. Tessa kept the live stream running, turning her camera toward the truck, the waterfront, and the growing panic. The public address system failed. Northline had cut the primary power, so festival workers used handheld speakers, boat horns, and vehicle sirens to move people away from the low shoreline. For years, Aurora Bay had trusted official reassurances. Now survival depended on ordinary residents believing one another faster than they believed the company that employed half the town. Dane drove the rescue boat through the crowded harbor. Boyd cut between anchored sailboats, using them as obstacles. Wren crouched near the bow, gripping the rail. Dane could not fire without risking her life. Behind them, Marin reached the maintenance truck and found Rook still guarding it despite the pain in his paw. The dog's eyes followed the disappearing boat. Marin opened the cab and located the remote controller, but its countdown had already begun. At the hospital, Jonah listened through Claire's phone while technicians connected him to a secure terminal. His face was pale beneath his untrimmed beard, and every breath cost him effort, yet his mind remained precise. He explained that closing all the discharge gates would increase pressure against the damaged foundation. Opening them fully would tear the eastern base apart. The only survivable option was to redirect the release into an auxiliary reservoir north of the dam. The reservoir had been removed from modern emergency plans because Northline considered the surrounding land more valuable for development. Its mechanical gate could still be activated through an old maintenance channel. Marin entered Jonah's instructions, while Tessa relayed the sequence from the lighthouse. The system rejected the first code. The countdown continued. On the lake, Boyd looked back and saw Dane gaining. He pointed the pistol toward Wren and shouted for Dane to fall away. Wren's hand found a red emergency horn mounted beneath the console. She remembered Jonah's lessons. Create confusion. Move when the captor looks away. She pulled the horn. The blast erupted inches from Boyd's head. He flinched, and the boat veered hard. Wren dropped to the deck. Dane brought the rescue craft alongside and jumped across the gap. Boyd swung the pistol toward him, but the uneven wake threw both men against the railing. Dane trapped Boyd's wrist, drove him to the floor, and stripped the weapon away. Wren crawled toward the stern, where Rook should have been waiting but was not. Back at the maintenance truck, the final code failed. Rook began striking the ground with his good paw. 3 beats, a pause, then 3 more. Marin looked at him, then at the controller. The system was not waiting for a standard digital command. Jonah had built the emergency override around the same old mechanical sequence used in the tunnels. High, low, middle. Tessa entered the pressure bell order. The auxiliary reservoir gate opened. Across the dam, steel machinery groaned beneath the earth. Water that had been building behind the compromised eastern section shifted northward through a forgotten spill channel. The main gates still opened partially, sending a wall of water through the industrial canal, but the pressure against the foundation dropped before the crack could shear completely. Sirens rose across Aurora Bay as the surge struck the empty lower roads and flooded storage yards rather than homes. Everett attempted to escape from a private helipad on Northline property. State police vehicles blocked the access road before his helicopter could lift. Federal agents, alerted through Tessa's broadcast and Jonah's data upload, arrived with warrants covering conspiracy, kidnapping, evidence destruction, and public endangerment. Everett was led away beneath the fading summer light, while employees who had once lowered their eyes watched in silence. Dane returned to the dock with Wren wrapped in a rescue blanket. Boyd was transferred into federal custody. Claire arrived from the hospital, just as Marin led Rook away from the maintenance truck. The German Shepherd had remained standing until the explosive team secured every charge. Then his legs gave way. Wren ran to him and dropped to her knees. She wrapped both arms around his neck, pressing her face into his wet black and rust fur. For 6 months, she had carried her grief in silence, as if speaking might make her father's death permanent. Now the tears came without restraint. She cried for Jonah, for Claire, for the darkness beneath the dam, and for the dog who had believed when no one else could. Rook lifted his head once and touched his nose to her cheek. Around them, the people of Aurora Bay watched the water recede from the streets beneath a sky that still held one last line of gold. 3 weeks after the Solstice Festival, Aurora Bay no longer looked like a town waiting for disaster. The water had receded from the industrial roads. Damaged docks were being rebuilt, and the paper lanterns that had never been released that night now hung in shop windows as symbols of survival. Federal investigators occupied 2 floors of the Northline Administrative Building. Everett Shaw had been indicted on charges that included conspiracy, kidnapping, falsification of safety records, destruction of evidence, and deliberate endangerment of the public. Boyd Straker faced additional charges for unlawful imprisonment, attempted abduction, and the use of explosives near a public gathering. Several county officials resigned before investigators could question them, while others discovered that loyalty purchased through money disappeared quickly when bank records became evidence. Northline Hydro lost control of the dam. A joint team of state engineers and federal specialists took over the emergency repairs, lowering the reservoir while reinforcing the fractured eastern foundation. The work would take years, but the immediate danger had passed. For the first time in a decade, every pressure reading from the dam was available to the public. Tessa Quill printed the first new issue of the Aurora Bay Ledger from a rented office above the bakery. Her photograph appeared nowhere on the front page. She believed the evidence mattered more than the person who exposed it. The headline reads simply, "The town they could not silence." Jonah Avery returned home in a wheelchair, thinner than Claire remembered and quieter than Wren had ever known him. His infected leg had required 2 surgeries, and the nerves in his left foot might never fully recover. The beard he had grown in captivity remained for several weeks because he could not bring himself to look like the man he had been before. His broad shoulders had narrowed, his skin was pale beneath the fading bruises, and his once restless energy had become a careful economy of motion. Yet his eyes were still unmistakably Jonah's blue, observant and capable of finding humor in places where most people found only damage. Recovery did not arrive as a triumphant reunion. It entered the Avery home in small, difficult pieces. Jonah sometimes woke beneath the kitchen table after dreaming that the floor was filling with water. He could not tolerate locked bathroom doors. The sound of pipes vibrating inside the walls made his hand shake. Claire learned that love did not give her the power to repair him. It only allowed her to remain close while he repaired himself. She was patient, but not endlessly gentle. When Jonah tried to hide his nightmares or dismiss his pain, she confronted him with the same steady honesty she had used with frightened patience. "You survived 6 months because you refused to disappear," she told him one night. "Do not come home and disappear in front of us." Wren approached her father more carefully than Rook did. For days, she watched Jonah from doorways, as though afraid he might vanish if she moved too quickly. She brought him drawings, but did not sit beside him. Jonah never forced the distance closed. He waited. One morning, he found her sketchbook open on the porch. The newest picture showed the family beneath the lighthouse, but Jonah had been drawn in pale gray, almost transparent. Beside him, Rook was colored with such heavy black and brown strokes that the paper had nearly torn. Jonah understood. The dog had become real to Wren in the months when her father existed only as a possibility. That afternoon, he asked her to help her place the bandage on Rook's injured paw. They sat on the floor together while the German Shepherd rested between them. Rook's black saddle had regained its shine, though a small patch of fur had been shaved from one leg. He was recovering faster than Jonah, but he still limped after long walks. Wren wrapped the bandage too tightly. Jonah gently guided her fingers and showed her how to leave room for circulation. It was the first ordinary thing they had done together since his return. When they finished, Wren leaned against his shoulder. Jonah closed his eyes and held his daughter without speaking. Dane visited every day, but rarely stayed long. He repaired the porch steps, installed new security lights, and drove Jonah to medical appointments. He performed these tasks with the discipline of a man completing a mission, but Jonah recognized avoidance when he saw it. One evening, as the sun remained low over the lake, Jonah found Dane standing near the dock with Rook beside him. Dane's body had healed from the tunnel, but his face remained drawn. He admitted that he blamed himself for bringing Wren to the lighthouse and allowing Boyd to reach her. He also admitted something older. Years earlier, during a failed extraction, Dane had chosen intelligence over a wounded teammate because orders demanded it. The man died before Dane returned. That memory had shaped every decision since, including his anger toward Jonah and his refusal to answer the final calls. "I thought if I kept moving, I would never have to decide whether I was still the man who left someone behind," Dane said. Jonah rested both hands on his cane. "You came back for me." Dane shook his head. Rook did. Jonah looked down at the dog. "Then maybe you should stop treating them like it makes your part smaller." Jonah explained that the bracelet had never been a random clue. During his first weeks in captivity, a maintenance worker had secretly begun leaving him extra water. The man was frightened of Boyd and refused to contact police, but he agreed to carry one object out of the tunnels. Jonah chose the parachute core bracelet because it held his scent and the H-17 marker Dane would recognize. He instructed the worker to leave it at the Avery house only after hearing that a former SEAL and a German Shepherd had arrived in Aurora Bay. Jonah had been listening to guards discuss Dane's rented cabin and Everett's concern about Rook. From that moment, Jonah understood that the dog was his best chance. "Phones can be erased," he said. "Witnesses can be threatened. Records can be rewritten. But Rook would remember me." Dane stared at him. Jonah continued. The birdhouse, the whistle sequence, the 3 bells and the drawings he had taught Wren were parts of a chain designed long before his capture. He had not known exactly how the pieces would connect. He had only believed that if Wren preserved the clues and Rook found her, Dane would eventually follow. Rook lifted his head at the sound of his name. Jonah knelt with difficulty and touched the torn edge of the dog's left ear. "They kept telling me my family had accepted that I was dead," he said. "Some days I believed them, but every night I pictured this dog finding that bracelet. I told myself he would not stop." His voice weakened. "I stayed alive because I knew he would keep looking, even if every human being had been convinced there was nothing left to find." The revelation changed something in Dane. For years, he had viewed destiny as a force that dragged men toward violence, loss, and impossible choices. Jonah had turned it into something quieter, a child remembering a story, a frightened worker carrying a bracelet, and an animal refusing to abandon a familiar scent. None of them could have succeeded alone. Together, they had formed a path back to the living. Aurora Bay rebuilt itself around that truth. Maren Pike was appointed acting sheriff after federal investigators cleared her of wrongdoing and confirmed that her former supervisor had obstructed the original investigation. She accepted the position reluctantly, promising public reports, independent oversight, and an end to private meetings between law enforcement and corporate executives. Tessa reopened the Ledger as a non-profit community newspaper. Claire joined the Emergency Preparedness Council, where her calm authority made people listen without feeling commanded. Jonah began advising the engineers repairing the dam, first from home and later from an accessible office overlooking the reservoir. He refused Northline's settlement offer until every family in the flood zone received independent legal representation. Dane made a decision of his own. He did not immediately return to active operations. Instead, he and Rook helped establish a volunteer search and rescue unit serving the isolated communities along Lake Superior. Dane trained local handlers to follow scent across forests, snowfields, and collapsed structures. Rook became the team's senior dog, not because he was the fastest, but because he understood patience. Children who had once been afraid to approach him now waited at training demonstrations to touch the small tear in his ear. Near the end of summer, the Avery family gathered at the old lighthouse. Jonah walked with a cane. Claire carried a picnic basket, and Dane followed beside Rook along the cliff path. The lake shone beneath a clear sky, and white sailboats moved across the water far below. Wren removed Jonah's old H-17 identification tag from a cord around her neck and fastened it to Rook's collar. The metal rested against his thick fur beside his ordinary nameplate. "Do you think you knew Dad was alive from the beginning?" she asked. Dane watched Rook settle between Jonah and Wren. "Maybe he didn't know how the story would end," he said. "He only knew someone was still waiting to be found." A distant boat horn sounded across the lake. Rook raised his head, listened, and then rested his muzzle across Wren's shoes. He did not need to search anymore. The lighthouse caught the final light of evening and sent it turning across the water. The house, the dog, and the people beside him were not part of the life Dane had expected. They were the life that had found him when he had nearly stopped believing he belonged anywhere. Sometimes destiny did not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it came quietly, on four wounded paws, carrying the scent of someone the world had already declared lost.